Let's do this. Can you define annihilation?
Yeah. It's different than defeating. It's even different than unconditional surrender. It's an attempt to erase an entire culture. So there is no, after Scipio, to give you that example, there is no Carthaginian language that's concentrated. There's remnants. There is no deity called Baal. People, that is wiped out. There is no physical Carthage. The Romans will rebuild it about 100 years later, but it'll be a Roman city. So it's an effort to get rid of the culture, the language, the religion, and even the people, either by mass enslavement, mass execution, or forced intermarriage with people. So Carthage ceased to exist as a culture. And today, when you go into North Africa, the people there will be descendants of Arabs that came in the 7th or 8th century, but it's very hard to find Berbers that can trace their Punic. Same thing in southern Mexico. There are people who still speak Nahuatl, but it's a dispersed culture. And there is no Aztec. I mean, I live in a predominantly Mexican American town in the Central Valley, and I do know people who will still reference Aztec religion or medicines, but it's all isolated. There's no central Aztec culture. It was wiped out in the 16th century. Quickly, too. Quickly,
So,
in a matter of 3 years.
annihilation in a matter
Yes.
of 3 years. Why? Why did these leaders, be it Alexander the Great or Cortez, choose something that is not the norm historically? As you point out, the Germans are still here, the Japanese are still here. Most wars end in some type of colonization or simply turning it back over to a weakened version of the government that existed before. Why did these leaders choose annihilation?
There were two or three reasons. One is they had a history of animosity, of repeated wars. Carthage had fought Rome twice before. That Constantinople, for 1,000 years, had been in Asia, and for the last, 700, 800 years, Islam was always covetous of this beautiful city and this strategic location. On and on. So there was a prior history of animosity, and Cortez had tried to reason with the Aztecs. He tried to fight them, and he was defeated the first time. So there was an idea there was no settlement. It had to be an existential war. The other thing was they did it because they had the ability to. They had enormous military advantages. And three, the areas that they were targeting were all strategically located, rich. So Mexico City was considered by Cortez on the lake of Tenochtitlan as an ideal place to make a new capital for New Spain. Carthage was on one of the few good harbors in North Africa. It was right across from Rome, and the Romans felt this would be a wonderful place to spread Romanism into North Africa. And of course, Constantinople was on the Bosphorus. And the last 100 years, the sultans had said that it's in decline, we've got to take it. And then finally, they all had very substantial fortifications. That's something that people don't talk about, but it created a defensive mentality. The greatest walls in the ancient world were at Constantinople. They were just so formidable that nobody thought you could ever take them. But the city that once had 1 million people only had about 55,000 when it was taken. So they relied on defensive fortifications and natural terrain rather than offense and taking the war to the enemy. And so it was very uncanny how similar they were. And the epilogue, I try to talk about the United States, is our fertility declining? Do we still think we're the power we were at Korea or World War II? Have we won a war since Korea? Did we win? I mean, that was kind of a deadlock. Why don't we win wars? Are we a united people? There were a lot of divisions within these cities as well. And do we have existential enemies that we don't understand? We feel that we look at the Chinese and say they don't really want to take the United States. We can work with the Chinese. They're not antithetical to us. Let's let in 600,000 Chinese students. Stuff like that naivete is very common.
I want to spin it forward, Victor, into application to the United States. But before I do, I do want to ask you about, it seems to me that the technological or warfare advantage would be massive in the decision process of how far to take you toward annihilation. In other words, it's not simply the moral grace of God that keeps the victor from annihilating, it's ability. And that ability dictated by military might and in no small part, I would imagine, by technological advantage. In other words, you know, we often do the cost-benefit analysis. Why do we fight Vietnam or Afghanistan with one arm behind our back? Because in part, we don't want to go be the conquerors and take on the cost of dominating that society. We could. We do have that technological advantage. We have that ability, but we don't because we have both a moral calculus and we run this cost-benefit analysis. So it seems to me when you're looking outside at existential threats, you have to start with who actually even has the ability to dominate and annihilate.
Yeah, all of them did. Cortez never had at any one time more than 2,500 men. And he conquered an empire that had 4 million people and an army of 250,000. But what did he have that they didn't have? He had arquebuses, an early form of firearms. He had huge Mastiff dogs. He had Toledo steel armor and blades and cannon and crossbows that were reinforced with steel. So he had these battles are almost incomprehensible where 100 conquistadors are killed and they killed 50,000 people. And yet it's documented. The same thing with the Romans, that the Carthaginians had no idea that a Roman army would land at Utica with 90,000. That was almost the size of D-Day on the first day. But Romans had that ability to transport an entire army, and then they were masters of siegecraft. And you could argue that, unfortunately for the Thebans, they believed that they were still into the mode of classical Greek warfare and not the Macedonians of Philip II and Alexander the Great, because they were the masters of siegecraft and took the city. The seven-gated Thebes was mythically renowned for never being conquered, and Alexander took it in 24 hours. And then he butchered everybody. That was pretty much what happened. When they took the city, they butchered people, everybody inside, or enslaved them. So yeah, I think technological and tactical and strategic advantages were necessary, and they were not appreciated by the people who were targeted.